Hallelujah, Shalom family, love to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Welcome. On this channel I discuss topics to edify and encourage the children of Yisrael to return to the ancient path of Yahuwah. I invite you to comment, like, subscribe, and share this video. In this video we're going to discuss one of the Moedim or appointed times of Yahuwah. Chag Shavuot is known in English as the Feast of Weeks, while it is sometimes referred to as Pentecost due to its timing after the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Pentecost meaning 50 in Greek. It is not the same as the Christian Pentecost. It is a high Sabbath, or Shabbat HaGadol, that occurs on the 6th day of the Hebrew month of Sivan. In the Torah, Shavuot marks the wheat harvest in the land of Israel.
Stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gotta keep on keeping on, I can feel it in my bones.
The word Shavuot means weeks, and it marks the conclusion of the counting of the Omer. Its date is directly linked to that of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The Torah mandates the 7-week counting of the Omer, beginning on the 2nd day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, to be immediately followed by Shavuot. This counting of days and weeks is understood to express anticipation and desire for the giving of the Torah. On the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the people of Yisrael were freed from their enslavement to Pharaoh. On Shavuot, they were given the Torah and became a nation committed to serving Yahuwah. It is one of the Torah-ordained 3 pilgrimage festivals. Shemot, or Exodus chapter 23. 3 times you shall keep a feast unto me in the year. You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread 7 days, as I commanded you, in the time appointed of the month Abib. For in it you came out of Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty. And the feast of harvest, the first fruits of your labors, which you have sown in the field, and the feast of ingathering, which is in the end of the year, when you have gathered in your labors out of the field. 3 times in the year all your males shall appear before Adonai Yahuwah. So we have 3 feasts in the year. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, followed by the Feast of Weeks, and finalized by the Feast of Tabernacles. So we have Chag HaMatzot, Chag Shavuot, and Chag Sukkot. And each of these feasts is connected to a harvest during the year. So the Feast of Unleavened Bread is connected to the barley harvest. The Feast of Weeks is connected to the wheat harvest. The Feast of Tabernacles is connected to the grape harvest. And during these 3 times, all male Israelites are to travel and keep feast in Jerusalem. Shemot chapter 34. And you shall observe the Feast of Weeks, the first fruits of wheat harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering at the year's end. Thrice in the year shall all your men children appear before Adonai Yahuwah, the Eluah of Yisrael. Bamidbar, or Numbers, chapter 28. Also in the day of the first fruits, when you bring a new meat offering unto Yahuwah, after your weeks be out, you shall have a set-apart convocation. You shall do no servile work. So again, Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost, is a high Shabbat, a Shabbat HaGadol. So on this day, we are to have a convocation or an assembly, and there is no work done on that day. The only work that is allowed to be done on these high Shabbats is the work of preparing food. Chag. Chag is the Hebrew word that is translated into English as festival or feast. It means festival gathering, pilgrim feast. Shavuot. Shavuot is the plural of Shabua, which is translated in English as weeks. Wa'ikra or Leviticus chapter 23. And you shall count unto you from the morrow after this Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. So this is speaking about the first fruits of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, where they brought the sheaf of barley as a wave offering to the priest. Antiquities of the Jews, Book 3, Chapter 10. In the month of Xanthicus, which is by us called Nisan, and is the beginning of our year, on the 14th day of the lunar month, when the sun is in Aries, for in this month it was that we were delivered from bondage under the Egyptians, the Torah ordained that we should every year slay that sacrifice which I before told you we slew when we came out of Egypt, which was called the Passover. The Feast of Unleavened Bread succeeds that of the Passover and falls on the 15th day of the month. But on the 2nd day of Unleavened Bread, which is the 16th day of the month, they first partake of the fruits of the earth, for before that they do not touch them. So we see that according to the historian Josephus, the 16th day of the first month of Abib, which is also called Nisan, is when that first fruit of barley harvest is waved. So after that is when we count the 7 Sabbaths, leading up to Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks. Verse 16. Even unto the morrow after the 7th Sabbath shall you number 50 days, and you shall offer a new meat offering unto Yahuwah. You shall bring out of your habitations 2 wave loaves of 2/10 deals. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be taken with leaven. They are the first fruits unto Yahuwah. And you shall offer with the bread 7 lambs without blemish of the first year, and 1 bullock, and 2 rams. They shall be for a burnt offering unto Yahuwah, with their meat offering and their drink offerings, even an offering made by fire, of sweet savor unto Yahuwah. Verse 19. Then you shall sacrifice 1 kid of the goats for a sin offering, and 2 lambs of the first year for a sacrifice of peace offerings. And the priest shall wave them with the bread of the firstfruits for a wave offering before Yahuwah, with the 2 lambs. They shall be set apart to Yahuwah for the priest. And you shall proclaim on the selfsame day, that it may be a set-apart convocation unto you. You shall do no servile work therein. It shall be a statute forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations. So we see that Yahuwah commanded that this is to be a statute forever. We are to rehearse this feast day forever. We are to have a set-apart convocation. We are to have an assembly of Israelites. And again, we do no servile work. It is a Shabbat HaGadol, a high Sabbath. Devarim or Deuteronomy 16. 7 weeks shall you number unto you, beginning to number the 7 weeks from such time as you begin to put the sickle to the corn. So again, we're going to look at when we are supposed to count our 7 weeks. Antiquity of the Jews, Book 3, Chapter 10. The Feast of Unleavened Bread succeeds that of the Passover, and falls on the 15th day of the month. But on the 2nd day of the Unleavened Bread, which is the 16th day of the month, they first partake of the first fruits of the earth, for before that they do not touch them. And after this it is that they may publicly or privately reap their harvest. So again, the historian Josephus confirms that we're to begin the count the 16th day of Abib or Nisan. Verse 9, 7 weeks shall you number unto you. Begin to number the 7 weeks from such time as you begin to put the sickle to the corn. And you shall keep the feast of weeks unto Yahuwah your Elohim with a tribute of a freewill offering of your hand, which you shall give unto Yahuwah your Elohim, according as Yahuwah your Elohim has blessed you. And you shall rejoice before Yahuwah your Elohim, you and your son and your daughter, and your manservant and your maidservant, and the Levite that is within your gates, and the stranger and the fatherless and the widow that are among you, in the place which Yahuwah your Elohim has chosen to place his name there. And you shall remember that you were a bondman in Egypt, and you shall observe and do these statutes. So again, the place that Yahuwah chose to place his name is the temple, Jerusalem, in the land of Yisrael, the promised land. And again, we know that as we bring our tithe of the wheat grain and all of our increase, we are to give to the stranger, to the father and the widow, including the Levite. So this is a time of giving to the poor, giving to the less fortunate, those that are in need, and rejoicing in the goodness of Yahuwah, remembering that we were in bondage, and as we are scattered in our bondage in these times, we look forward to a time when we can celebrate the Feast of Weeks and all the Moedim, all the appointed times in complete freedom. As it is today, we celebrate as rehearsals, looking forward to the time that we can completely celebrate the feast days, doing everything that Yahuwah has commanded us to do. Tobit, chapter 1. And when I was in my own country, in the land of Yisrael, being but young, all the tribe of Naphtali, my father, fell from the house of Jerusalem, which was chosen out of all the tribes of Yisrael, that all the tribes should sacrifice there, where the temple of the habitation of the Most High was consecrated and built for all ages. So again, we have the confirmation that Yahuwah chose Jerusalem as a place where the tribes of Yisrael were to come for the feast days and sacrifices. Now all the tribes which together revolted in the house of my father Naphtali sacrificed unto the heifer Baal. But I alone went often to Jerusalem at the feast, as it was ordained unto all the people of Yisrael by an everlasting decree, having the firstfruits and tenths of increase, with that which was first shorn, and them gave I at the altar to the priests, the children of Aharon. So we see that Tobit was a righteous man, that even though the tribe of Naphtali and the house of Yisrael fell away from obedience to Yahuwah, Tobit remained faithful, and he continued to obey the commandments. Verse 7. The first 10th part of all increase I gave to the sons of Aharon, who ministered at Jerusalem. Another 10th part I sold away, and went and spent it every year at Jerusalem. And the third I gave unto them to whom it was meet, as Deborah my father's mother had commanded me, because I was left an orphan by my father. Furthermore, when I was come to the age of a man, I married Anna of my own kindred, and of her I begat Tobiah. And when we were carried away captive to Nineveh, all my brothers and those that were of my kindred did eat of the bread of the Gentiles. But I kept myself from eating, because I remembered Elohim with all my heart. So we see that when the northern kingdom, the house of Yisrael, was taken into captivity into Assyria, Tobit continued to be obedient to the Torah. Tobit chapter 2. Now when I was come home again, and my wife Anna was restored unto me with my son Tobiah, in the feast of Pentecost, which is the set-apart feast of the 7 weeks, there was a good dinner prepared me, in the which I sat down to eat. So Pentecost is the Greek word. It means the 50th day. So this is the Greek translation for Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks. And we see that Tobit, being a man faithful to the Torah, obedient to Yahuwah, even in his exile in Assyria, he continued to rehearse the feast of Yahuwah. Tobit chapter 2. Now when I was come home again, and my wife was restored unto me with my son Tobiah, in the feast of Pentecost, which is the set-apart feast of the 7 weeks, there was a good dinner prepared me, in the which I sat down to eat. And when I saw abundance of meat, I said to my son, Go and bring what poor man soever you shall find out of your brothers, who is mindful of Yahuwah, and lo, I tarry for you. But he came again and said, Father, one of our nation is strangled, and is cast out in the marketplace. Then before I had tasted of any meat, I started up, and took him up into a room until the going down of the sun. So we see that in exile, Tobit rehearsed the feast day of Pentecost, where he was. Of course, being in captivity, he was not able to go to Jerusalem to celebrate Shavuot. Verse 5. Then I returned and washed myself, and ate my meat in heaviness, remembering that prophecy of Amos, as he said, Your feast shall be turned into mourning, and all your mirth into lamentation. Therefore I wept, and after the going down of the sun I went and made a grave, and buried him. So of course, Tobit was quoting from the prophet Amos, chapter 8. And I will turn your feasts into mourning, and all your songs into lamentation. And I will bring up sackcloth upon all loins, and baldness upon every head. And I will make it as the mourning of an only son, and the end thereof as a bitter day. And this is what we are experiencing even today, as we awaken to our heritage as Israelites. We're awakening in captivity in the lands of our enemies. So even though we are returning to the Torah, returning to the ancient paths, and starting to rehearse the set-apart times, the modim of Yahuwah, we do it with a sense of heaviness. Even though we are looking to be pleasing to Yahuwah, we see around us all the oppression, all the murders of our brothers at the hands of our enemies. So even though we rehearse these feast days in our captivity, we do it with an amount of lamentation and mourning. 2 Maccabees chapter 12. But when Yehuda and his company had called upon Almighty Elohim, who with his power breaks the strength of his enemies, they won the city, and slew 25,000 of them that were within. From thence they departed to Sitopolis, which lies 600 furlongs from Jerusalem. But when the Yahudim that dwelt there had testified that the Sitopolitans dealt lovingly with them, and had treated them kindly in the time of their adversity, they gave them thanks, desiring them to be friendly still unto them. And so they came to Jerusalem, the Feast of Weeks approaching. And after the feast called Pentecost, they went forth against Gorgias, the governor of Idumea. So we see even in the book of Maccabees, we see that Yehuda and his army of righteous Israelites took time to take a break from their military campaign and celebrate Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, otherwise called Pentecost. Acts chapter 2. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. And suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of a rushing mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues like as of fire, and it sat upon each of them. And they were all filled with the Ruach HaKodesh, or the set-apart Spirit, and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Yehudim, devout men, out of every nation under heaven. So we see even in the so-called New Testament, after the resurrection and ascension of Yahushua HaMashiach, we see that his disciples, his Talmudim, were still keeping the Moedim, or appointed times of Yahuwah. And we see that at Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, the Ruach HaKodesh came upon the disciples. So we're going to look at verse 5. And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Yehudim, devout men, out of every nation under heaven. So we see that word devout is the Greek eulabes, which means taking hold well, carefully and surely, reverencing Elohim, pious, circumspect, devout. So these men who were Yehudim were devout. They were faithful to Yahuwah. They were in Jerusalem per the commandment of Yahuwah in the Torah, that all men, Israelites, were to come to Jerusalem, the place where Yahuwah had placed his name, for these 3 feasts, Shavuot being one of them. And we know that they were scattered, because it says, out of every nation under heaven. But even though they were scattered, they continued to return to Jerusalem for these feasts. Acts chapter 20. For Shaul, or Paul, had determined to sail by Ephesus, because he would not spend the time in Asia, for he hasted, if it were possible for him, to be at Jerusalem the day of Pentecost. So we see that Shaul made it in his mind, he was determined to make time to be in Jerusalem for Pentecost, to fulfill the Torah, the commandments of Yahuwah. 1 Corinthians chapter 16. But I will tarry at Ephesus until Pentecost. So in 1 Corinthians, Shaul tells the Israelites in Corinth that he will stay at Ephesus so that he will be able to make it to Jerusalem for Pentecost. So we see 2 times where it is witnessed that Shaul took time purposely to be prepared to be in Jerusalem for Pentecost. This is the same Shaul whose letters the Christians twist and say that the Torah is done away with. However, we see that Torah was not done away with. In fact, Paul was obedient to the commandments of Yahuwah in keeping the feast days, specifically here of Pentecost or Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks. Review questions. What does the word Chag mean? What does the word Shavuot mean? What does the word Pentecost mean? What are the 3 pilgrimage feasts? Where are Israelite men supposed to celebrate Chag Shavuot? Should Israelites rehearse Chag Shavuot while in captivity? Did the disciples of Yehusha continue to celebrate Chag Shavuot after his ascension? How will you commemorate Chag Shavuot? Fear Elohim and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Bind up the testimony, seal the Torah among my disciples. Shalom, family.